God bless everybody. It's February 2nd of 2025. This is a quick market update. We should have a fairly rough day in the markets tomorrow. Trump's tariffs will start to go into effect within the next 24 to 48 hours. And so what this is causing right now is what they call a trade war. But I don't think a lot of people quite understand what Trump's doing here, so I'll try to explain it fairly quickly. So Trump put a 25% tariff on not only Canada, but Mexico. And then he also added a 10% tariff against China. Part of this is due to the trade deficits and how Trump states that we're being mistreated by these other countries because we've set up terrible trade agreements, sort of like NAFTA was a terrible trade agreement. China's been taxed 10% due to their pushing a lot of fentanyl through our borders, and this then radiates out to Mexico and Canada because they're also trafficking not only illegals into the country, but also these illicit drugs into the country also. So due to Trump putting these tariffs down, Canada is in a retaliatory mode right this moment. So Canada, on the other hand, now has put basically a challenge of a 25% tariff imposed against the United States on all Canadian goods. And I think this is sort of funny because somebody said, well, if you put tariffs on, the United States people will pay for that. And that's right. The tariff or the tax will go on to whoever's purchasing the whatever they're buying out of Canada or Mexico or wherever, like Walmart. But the thing that Trump knew was that if he put these tariffs on, he could leverage against the other countries. So what he's done is he placed a 25% tariff on the other country, and then what did Trudeau do? He placed a 25% tariff on us, which taxes his different businesses over there. And so, look, Canada cannot fight us on a trade war. And what will happen next is, as Trump indicated, he's going to then raise another 25% tariff against Canada. This won't go on for long before Canada and Mexico and these other countries capitulate, and then they'll renegotiate, and then the tariffs will come off, and then we will have a better trade agreement, and the deficits will be much less than what we originally had. So just realize that Trump's doing this for a purpose. I don't think people understand the method of what's happening. Yes, the tariffs do cause a burden on our businesses right away, which then gets passed on to the consumer. But once the other country retaliates with a 25% tax, they're getting taxed, and we retaliate. There's a point of break. So what will happen is, because we're a much larger economy than Canada, Canada can't take this kind of carnage. They would then capitulate, and they would drop the tariffs, and they would renegotiate a proper contract. So the trade war that's getting ready to happen will affect the markets as they open up tomorrow. They're already affecting the foreign markets. China and the original opening markets are really struggling today due to the tariffs that are being placed on them, as well as these other countries, due to this trade war that Trump's planned on putting on the world to try to get everybody into a better place. There is a reason he's doing this. But as you can see, we're having some carnage in the market futures, and so tomorrow is going to be a pretty devastating market day right off the bat. It could be a black swan event. The other thing that will be affected, because the dollar strength seems to be moving up, that we would possibly see a collapse of gold and silver not a collapse, but it would dump. You would see a fairly decent percentage drop on that. This may give you a buying opportunity as we move forward into that May 18th Fed meeting. And what I mean by that is, so what we're going to see is possibly a melt up of the 2 and 10. They may flatten out, but they may melt up. And what that's going to do is force J to, instead of doing like the pause he did on January 31st, he may actually have to raise rates because he's following the 2-year bond, and the 2-year bond's melting up over where their rate is, and so it's not restrictive. And so that will break the markets. That could be potentially a real black swan event, because if Jay Powell has to pivot and start raising rates because he's already cut too much, because he didn't see that stagflation, inflation, and all kinds of stuff is getting ready to happen as we move into the second quarter here, he's going to have to raise rates, and that will destroy the markets, at least temporarily. The other thing that's happening here is you have a dollar strength that's destroying the EM, or the emerging market currencies. So you can see that the euro is struggling against the dollar, and we're actually almost going into parity, and that's terrible. I went to Italy in 2007 in powerlifting, and at that time the dollar was about 150 to the euro, so we were getting killed on that front, and it was expensive to go over at that time. Now look at this, you're at €1 to $1.02. Okay, that's almost parity. This is bad for the foreign currencies, because not only are they getting taxed with these tariff wars that are happening, and Canada's included in this, as well as China, Mexico, as their currencies start to collapse and are less valued due to the dollar's strength. They're not only getting hit by the tax on the tariff that Trump's forcing on them because they're retaliating on the other side with their own tariffs, but the dollar strength is literally destroying the buying power of these emerging market currencies. And so this is going to cause all kinds of problems for the central banks, because they have no ability to keep up with their debt ratios. And so you're going to start to see some massive carnage in the banks, I believe. This is probably going to start to affect people on the ground, because even though these tariffs will hopefully be temporary in the nature that Trump's trying to get them to basically capitulate so that he can do a better contract, these are inflationary, especially if you're buying stuff at Walmart and they're buying stuff from Canada. They are going to increase those prices by 25% on average to cover that tariff of that product. Now, how long will that happen? I don't know. As you're going into March and potentially an invasion by Turkey, which is going to start to really break down the Middle East on top of that. And then I talked about you potentially have a COVID pandemic getting ready to hit you shortly after that, because like I said, in 2019 Trump pulls the troops, 3 days later Erdogan invades, and then right after that we see global pandemic or COVID reports coming out in mid-October, and by the first of the year it was a global pandemic. And I believe that this pandemic will be a whole lot worse. One thing I will warn people about here is I believe that the world is getting ready to see some massive changes. If you follow my channel and you realize that on my paradigm chart, you potentially could see a beast system come in and a potential rising of an antichrist by March of 26. In the next 12 to 13 months, you are going to see extreme carnage on the ground, because if you go into the seals and the trumpets before the rising of Antichrist on the 6th trumpet, it's going to affect approximately a third to a half of the planet in general, and it indicates that about 2 billion people are going to be affected. Now, the reason I bring that up is I think that we have to start to get ready mentally, physically, spiritually for what is getting ready to happen. Think about what's happened just in the last 3 or 4 years. You've seen, 1 million people perish in the war in Ukraine. I don't know exact totals, but let's say it's 1.1 million to 1.5 million based on losses on both sides, as well as, let's say, if you take their numbers, which are probably skewed, the 40,000 to 50,000 people died in Gaza, and now you got a war up in the northern in Hezbollah with Lebanon. If you take that in totality, that's about, if you go there, it's about 1.5 million people. Okay, and that is it's horrific. Don't get me wrong here. I'm just trying to explain to you what I think could be coming. So if you've lost 1.5 million people in wars and things within these regions of Ukraine and the Middle East and just in general around the world, can you imagine what it would be like based on the Bible, seals through the first 4 trumpets, to a rising of an Antichrist on the 6th trumpet, which I say could potentially happen on March of 2026. You could lose potentially a third of the planet in population. It says a quarter to a third. Well, there's about 8 billion people on the planet, so you could potentially lose 2 to 3 billion people through wars, pandemics, and just pure chaos on the ground as people are losing their jobs and they're starting to starve to death. And these are going to affect, you're going to have shortages on the shelves because some things aren't going to be brought into this country. And that's another thing. Trump is trying to put together an isolational type situation. And I don't mean that negatively. It's actually probably not a bad thing, because what he's doing is, if you look at what he's trying to accomplish here, he wants Greenland, he wants Canada, he wants the United States, he wants Mexico, and he wants the Panama Canal. And in that same breath, now he's not going to absorb all these countries, okay? It's probably not going to happen because they're sovereign nations. But if he can unite them, we can do a couple things. Not only can we put a shield over the top of the United States against the hypersonic missiles that Russia has that we don't, and think about that. They can get their missiles over here in minutes. We don't have hypersonic missiles because we've neglected our arsenals. And to be the baddest guy on the planet, to keep the world safe, you got to have these types of deterrents, as much as you don't want them there. So he's building not only a shield like an Iron Dome over the whole continent of the North America in general, through cooperation of all these different countries to protect this country from Russia flying missiles over the North Pole to us and Canada and whoever else. He's also looking at potentially putting a Star Wars type system up in space. Okay, and what this will do is that this would give them the ability to knock out a lot of these missiles over the ocean before they would actually enter into North America. There is an interesting, I saw an interesting conversation with a extremely knowledgeable man that deals with space and how Musk potentially is developing these satellites that would basically be a net over the country that could then spot through sensors to to see these missiles coming. They would have time to knock them out so they wouldn't get here, and it would be like, lasers and things like that, like Star Wars type thing. But he said, and this was really interesting, I thought I should bring this to your attention, that the Chinese have actually built these small orbital satellites that have like retractable arms. And then what they can do is they can control these satellites to literally move our satellites out of orbit, so they could literally knock out our satellites so that they're ineffective. And by pushing them out of orbit, they could knock out our systems. Now, we never had to think about this because we never thought we would ever have to go up into, geocentristic space up there to be able to deal with this kind of a threat. But that's the kind of nature of the system that we're in, is that we have to protect our satellites at this point against not only cyber attacks, but potential threat of hostile satellites and different things like that. So you guys are entering into a unique time on this planet. It's going to get interesting as we move into the next year, possibly into a beast system. And if you think about that, you're in February of 2025. If you go to my paradigm chart and have followed my channel at all, I have a rising of a antichrist figure approximately around March 30th of 2000. Well, he rises before he signs the treaty around March 30th of 2026. So you would see that rising approximately between March 4th and March 30th of 2026, based on Six Seal event around the March 4th, 2026 time frame. So there is a lot that is going on. If you guys don't have your oil in your lamps, you need to get ready for this. If we get a global pandemic in the next month or two, which is highly possible with the bird flu moving into all of the eggs, the chicken, potentially the cattle as well, is starting to transmute and move into the human populations. If you get a breakout, it could be much worse than the COVID, which is what I think will happen if you're going to potentially lose 2 to 3 billion people in the next year and 14 months or whatever. So I want you to be aware of all these things. I don't have a crystal ball. I can't guarantee that these things are going to happen, but based on the paradigm, this is where we are in time, and so I want to bring these things to your attention. I don't want you to go crazy. Just watch the situation, prepare properly. Look, you're going to be able to walk into the store and you're going to start to see shelves emptied, or you're going to start to see, what they'll do is they'll just spread things out because they just can't fill the shelves. And it'll be stuff that you don't care about anymore. So those are what they call deflationary items, because nobody cares about them, they can't sell them, and nobody wants them. They're still on the shelves. The inflationary items will be the ones that you want, like food and other things that you need, like medicines and things that you need to keep alive on a daily basis. Those will inflate. But you're in a stagflationary process possibly here, as people are starting to lose the ability through their discretionary spending to actually pay off any of these loans and things, high credit cards, car loans and things like this that are really starting to spiral out of control, as we're watching literally like a 2 trillion market cap on literal debt within the credit card systems through the United States, and people own this debt and they'll have to pay it back someday. Trump's trying to get a 10% base level on interest that the credit cards can charge you, because you're at 25 to 35% on most cards in general. Keep your eye on everything. Things are getting ready to change. You need to understand what's getting ready to happen. And I'm not going to give you a daily report on all of the terrible news out here, because no one can keep up with it, and there's a million videos out here and different things on how bad it is and stuff. There is major protests across the United States right now because of what's going on out here as they're purging the United States with illegals, and also people within the government and different things like that. And so just keep your eye on all these things. Be safe out there and find the Lord Jesus, the Son of God, which is the open door. He is the only way through this. And have a great night.